In a world where titles and appearances often overshadow the truth of who we are, one quiet act of recognition can rewrite everything. This is not the story of a CEO asserting his authority. It is the story of a man who walked into a place that should have known his name and found silence instead. Marcus Turner, calm, powerful, and unwavering, stood not to command, but to remind that dignity is not a favor to be granted, but a right to be honored. What began as a routine visit became a reckoning, not just for a bank, but for every soul who'd ever been overlooked. This is the story of how respect doesn't wear labels, and how the simplest act of truly seeing someone can echo farther than any boardroom decree. So, step inside. Witness the quiet revolution that began in a lobby and ended in every heart it touched. The morning was crisp, the kind that held a promise of possibility and the lingering bite of last night's cool breeze. The sun was barely up over Columbus, Ohio, as a silver Tesla glided into the parking lot of the East Livingston Avenue branch. Its quiet arrival didn't draw attention. That was part of its allure. No fanfare, no entourage, just a single man, stepping out with a purposeful calm. He was dressed in a white shirt, sleeves buttoned to the wrist, and black tailored slacks that moved with a fluid ease. Over it, a deep charcoal blazer framed his broad shoulders, the muted color echoing the early morning shadows. The man was tall, with a presence that seemed to both command the air around him and blend into it effortlessly. His skin, the color of dark coffee, contrasted with the crisp whiteness of his shirt, an understated statement of elegance and quiet power. His name was Marcus Turner, a 44-year-old CEO born and raised in Wichita Falls, Texas. If you read the financial pages, you'd know his name was synonymous with vision and relentless growth. In just 2 years, he'd doubled the valuation of Trilonics Financial, a tech firm he had built from the ground up, a company now weaving itself into the fabric of the Midwest banking sector. Last Friday, his firm had officially acquired 3 regional bank chains, each one a thread in the broader tapestry of his ambition. This branch, the one he was standing before now, had become part of his portfolio only days ago. But Marcus wasn't here this morning for a ceremonial tour or photo opportunity. He was here because he believed in seeing things for himself, in feeling the pulse of places that now bore his name. And so, he'd arrived without a driver or a security detail, without an appointment that announced his presence. His only companion was a black leather tote slung over his shoulder, holding the kind of meticulous notes and quiet resolve that defined his leadership. The doors to the bank opened at 9 a.m. Marcus waited a beat, his eyes scanning the neat facade, the blue and white signage that promised trust and security to every customer who walked in. Then, with a slow breath, he crossed the threshold at 9:03, moving past the faint scent of fresh coffee and printer ink that filled the lobby. The branch was a modest one, no marble floors or grand chandeliers, just clean lines and a sense of pragmatic efficiency. The carpet was a neutral gray, the walls a gentle cream that softened the edges of the morning light. A few potted plants, a muted television screen flickering silent news, and a row of low chairs formed the tableau of the lobby, each piece in its place. At the front, a man in khakis with a name badge glanced up at Marcus. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Just enough for a polite nod from Marcus, but no greeting came in return. The man looked back down at his computer, fingers tapping out a rhythm that didn't include Marcus. In that small gesture, so slight it might have been missed by anyone else, Marcus read everything he needed to know about the culture of this branch. But he said nothing. He never believed in playing his hand too soon. He walked past the front desk, heading straight for the business services counter at the back. There, 2 tellers stood behind a glass partition. One was a white woman in her early 30s, lips painted a deep red, hair pulled into a tight bun that glistened under the fluorescent lights. The other, older and of South Asian descent, wore glasses that perched precariously on her nose as she leafed through a manila folder. They were deep in conversation, their voices a low hum, as if the man who had just walked in didn't exist. Marcus paused at the counter, his posture calm and open. He didn't need to project anything. He carried an ease that was born of knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of, a quiet confidence that didn't need to be announced. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. Neither woman looked up immediately. The younger one, Shelby, according to the small brass nameplate, finally glanced up, her eyes flicking over Marcus in a single sweep that spoke volumes. She didn't see a CEO or an owner. She saw a black man in a quiet suit, standing at a counter where she didn't think he belonged. "Yes," she said, the question hanging in the air like an unfinished note. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "I'm here to speak with someone about the transition paperwork for the business accounts. My firm completed the acquisition last week, and I want to ensure we're aligned before Friday." Shelby's lips twitched at the corners, a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll need an appointment for that," she said, the words coded in a kind of rehearsed courtesy that Marcus had heard too many times before. "We don't just handle those kinds of things at the counter." He inclined his head slightly, unbothered by the tone. "I called yesterday. They told me someone named Devin would be available between 9 and noon. At the mention of Devin's name, Shelby's eyebrows lifted, but her smile didn't warm. She glanced around as if to find someone else to hand Marcus off to, then looked back at him. "Devin isn't in yet," she said crisply. "You can have a seat." Marcus glanced behind him at the 3 empty chairs lined up along the wall. They looked like they'd been there for decades, gray fabric worn at the edges. He checked the clock on the wall, 9:07, and turned back to Shelby, his tone even. "Would you mind letting someone know I'm here? I won't take long." Shelby rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, and tapped at her computer as if it had suddenly become the most important thing in the world. "I'll let someone know," she said without looking up again. It wasn't the words themselves that bothered Marcus. He'd heard plenty of polite dismissals in his life. It was the way they were said, the small casual cruelty of someone who thought they could size him up and decide his worth in the span of a glance. But Marcus didn't react. He sat down in one of the empty chairs, his black leather tote resting at his feet. The minutes ticked by with a heavy slowness. The television on the wall played a muted segment about the morning's headlines. Stocks up, futures uncertain, nothing he hadn't already read before breakfast. A soft instrumental version of "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" piped through the speakers, the irony not lost on Marcus. He tried to focus, to let the calm of the music wash over him, but his eyes kept drifting back to the counter, watching the way Shelby leaned forward to talk to a white man in a golf shirt, how she laughed at his jokes, how she nodded and smiled like the sun had just come up for him. The man left a few minutes later, smiling and shaking hands, his receipt tucked into his wallet. Marcus stayed where he was, his posture still and composed. He checked his watch, 9:22 now. Another customer walked in, a couple in business casual, and they were immediately greeted and ushered into an office. He watched them go, their eyes sliding over him like he was a shadow. He stood up again, the movement slow and deliberate, and walked back to the counter. "Excuse me," he said, his tone gentle but carrying an edge of steel. "Has Devin arrived?" Shelby didn't even bother to look apologetic. "Still not in," she said with that tight smile, "but I did let someone know you're here." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't let it show. "May I speak with whoever is available then?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am," Shelby started, then caught herself. "Sir, I said we'll call you when someone's ready." Marcus let out a quiet breath. "Okay," he said simply. He turned and walked back to his seat, passing another customer who was greeted with a smile that had never been offered to him. The couple looked at him briefly, their eyes sliding away as if he were just part of the furniture. The quiet of the lobby pressed in around him, but Marcus didn't fidget or shift. He had built an empire on patience, on knowing when to wait and when to strike. And though his patience was being tested now, he refused to give these strangers the satisfaction of seeing him falter. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Ellis Duque, his COO and trusted right hand. "Everything smooth at the branch?" the message read. Marcus stared at it for a moment, considering how easy it would be to type a quick lie. Yes, all good, just a quick stop. But he didn't believe in false reassurances, not when the truth was far more important. "Not quite," he typed back, his thumb steady. "Give me 10 minutes. He slipped the phone back into his tote and let his eyes wander back to the counter. Behind the glass, he saw Shelby lean in closer to Patricia, her voice low, but not low enough. "I don't know why he's still here," she said, her words slicing through the soft music like a knife. "He doesn't even look like he belongs in the business suite." Patricia let out a small laugh, her fingers still flipping through the folder. "Some people think a business card means they own the place." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. He didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He'd learned long ago that silence could be far more powerful than shouting, especially when you knew exactly who you were. The air in the bank shifted then, a subtle but undeniable change, like the moment before a storm, when the clouds gather low and the world holds its breath. Marcus sat, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes calm but unblinking. He was done waiting. And though the staff didn't yet know it, the next chapter of this quiet morning was about to begin. One that would leave no one in this branch unchanged. The seconds felt longer now, each tick of the wall clock a quiet reminder that Marcus Turner was still waiting in the lobby, still being treated like an afterthought in a place he owned. But he didn't let his impatience show. Instead, he leaned back in the worn gray chair, his posture still impeccable, as if he had all the time in the world. In reality, he had no intention of wasting it. He watched the way the tellers at the counter carried on as if he were invisible, the way they smiled and nodded at the next customer in line, a woman in a tailored coat who barely spared Marcus a glance, before she was ushered in with a practiced warmth. He could hear the muted sounds of the bank's morning routines, the beep of the money counter, the low hum of the printer, the polite laughter of the staff as they handled everyone else with a kindness that had been carefully withheld from him. It was a small theater of courtesy that had no seat for him, and he felt it in every breath he took. Yet, even as the minutes passed and the air grew thick with the kind of cold politeness that stung more than open hostility, Marcus's expression remained composed. This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But today, he wasn't just another black man in a suit. He was the owner of this building, this branch, these policies. He was the standard they would soon be measured against, though they didn't yet realize it. At 9:30, he stood again, the movement slow and deliberate, each step measured as he walked past the low chairs and toward the hallway that led to the offices. He didn't look back at Shelby or Patricia. He didn't need to. The air shifted slightly as he crossed the threshold into the staff-only area, a young black woman in a headset intercepting him almost immediately. She was petite, her headset snug against a halo of natural curls, and her eyes widened when she saw Marcus approaching. "Hi, sir. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but with an undercurrent of concern. Marcus met her gaze directly, his tone even but carrying the weight of his authority. "I'm looking for Devin," he said. "Or whoever is available for a quick business account inquiry. I called ahead yesterday." She hesitated for a moment, glancing down at her tablet before looking back up at him. "Devin isn't in yet," she said carefully, her voice softening as she read the calm insistence in his eyes. "But let me double-check the schedule. May I ask your name, sir?" Marcus spoke it softly, almost conversationally. "Marcus Turner." And he saw it then. The flicker in her eyes, the sudden shift in her posture as the name registered. Her eyes blinked a little faster, her shoulders squaring with a newfound awareness. "Of course, Mr. Turner," she said, her voice steady but respectful now. "I'll let Miss Lehman, the branch manager, know you're here right away." She disappeared into the hallway with a kind of quiet efficiency that was rare in places like this, and for the first time that morning, Marcus felt the air shift again, this time in a way that mattered. He returned to his seat, the rhythm of his heart slow and measured. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, a brief message from Ellis. "Need me to step in?" Marcus didn't reply right away. He stared at the screen, weighing the words he could send. Finally, he typed, "Not yet. Let me handle this." The quiet of the lobby returned, but there was a new tension to it now, like the moment just before a bowstring snaps. Behind the glass, Shelby was still tapping at her keyboard, but her shoulders looked tighter somehow, her movements a little too precise. Patricia had gone quiet, her eyes downcast, as if she could feel the weight of what was coming. Marcus didn't rush them. He knew how to let silence do the work for him. When the young woman with the headset, Janelle, returned, she moved with a calm purpose. "Miss Lehman is aware you're here, Mr. Turner," she said. "She'll be out in just a moment." Her voice was professional, but there was something else in her tone, an unspoken understanding that she saw him, really saw him, in a way no one else here seemed willing to. Marcus gave her a small nod of thanks, a silent acknowledgement of her professionalism. Then he watched as she stepped back, her expression composed but watchful, a quiet ally in a room that had offered him only indifference. It wasn't long before the door at the end of the hallway opened and a man stepped through. His hair was white, his suit perfectly pressed, and the small brass tag on his lapel read, "Thomas Beck, Regional Director." His eyes scanned the room with the practiced calm of someone who had seen too much and forgotten none of it. When his gaze landed on Marcus, there was no flicker of surprise, only the faint tightening of his jaw, the subtle squaring of his shoulders. "Mr. Turner, Thomas said, his voice low and even. "I'm Thomas Beck, the regional director. I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus rose slowly, his movements unhurried, as if he'd been expecting this exact moment all along. "We can speak in private," Thomas offered, glancing behind him toward the offices. But Marcus shook his head, his expression calm but unyielding. "We can speak here," he said, his voice carrying just enough to fill the lobby without raising in volume. There was a flicker of something in Thomas's eyes. Reluctance, perhaps. Or maybe just the realization that this conversation wouldn't be buried behind a closed door. He nodded once, turning to face the front desk. His voice was low but carried authority like a steel rod beneath velvet. "Everyone on the floor," he said. "Please step into the conference room, now." Shelby's mouth opened in protest, but the words died on her lips when Thomas's gaze settled on her. Patricia closed her folder with a small, nervous snap, and Derek, the man in khakis from the front desk, stood as if pulled by invisible strings. One by one, they filed into the conference room, the door closing behind them with a quiet finality that made the lobby feel suddenly vast and echoing. Marcus didn't move to follow them. He stood with Thomas near the glass doors, his phone in hand, but his attention unwavering. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," Marcus said, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "That's not how I lead." Thomas's lips pressed into a thin line, and he gave a small nod, his own shoulders relaxing a fraction. "But if people can't treat clients, any client, with basic decency," Marcus continued, his voice still calm, "they don't belong anywhere near a financial institution, especially not one that now operates under my name." The words weren't loud, but they filled the space between them with a quiet gravity. Thomas didn't argue. He just nodded again, a flicker of respect in his eyes. In that moment, Devin finally appeared in the hallway, his shirt rumpled, tie askew, as if he'd run straight from his car. His eyes darted from Thomas to Marcus, confusion and a dawning realization spreading across his face. "Is this?" he began, but Marcus cut him off with a glance that said everything. "It's handled," he said simply, and Devin's shoulders slumped as he nodded, stepping back to let the weight of the moment settle around him. Thomas stepped forward, opening the conference room door with a quiet authority that silenced the last of the murmurs inside. "Mr. Turner has a few words," he said, and his voice was firm enough to let everyone know that this wasn't a request. It was an imperative. Marcus walked in without haste, his steps measured, his eyes calm but unflinching. There was no dramatic pause, no theatrical clearing of his throat. He simply spoke the truth as he saw it, each word precise and deliberate. "I came here today on behalf of Trilonics Financial," he said, his tone even but with an edge of steel. "We closed the acquisition of this bank chain last Friday. I've visited over a dozen branches this week. Every visit has been professional, some even welcoming." He let the silence stretch for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on the room. "This one, however," he said quietly, "was different." Shelby sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. Derek shifted in his chair, his face pale and drawn. Patricia twisted her hands in her lap, her mouth set in a thin, hard line. "I sat in that lobby for over 30 minutes, Marcus continued. "I was told to wait, then ignored, talked about, dismissed. None of you knew who I was. That part doesn't bother me. I don't need special treatment. But what does matter, what has always mattered, is how you treat people you don't know." His voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper than any shout could have. He turned his head slightly, his gaze settling on Shelby. "Shelby, right?" She nodded once, barely a breath in her lungs. "Can you tell me why the woman who came in after me twice was served before me? Or why you thought it was appropriate to comment on whether I looked like I belonged in the business suite?" She said nothing, her eyes fixed on a spot on the carpet that suddenly seemed infinitely interesting. Marcus's expression didn't soften. "I'm not angry," he said quietly, "but I am disappointed, and I have every reason to be." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen once. "Effective immediately," he said, his tone final. "Shelby Langston, Derek Hanley, and Patricia Mehta, you are released from this location. You'll receive a formal termination letter from HR by noon. Security access is revoked, and your final checks will be delivered by mail." The silence that followed was absolute, a stillness so deep it felt like the world itself had paused to watch. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, her lips trembling. "Wait, you're firing us?" she whispered, Marcus met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Yes," he said simply. "But this is how we've always," Patricia began, but Marcus cut her off with a single word. "Exactly." He turned to Thomas, his voice calm and certain. "The rest will stay for retraining, full oversight. You'll coordinate with Ellis. I want a follow-up report by Friday." Thomas nodded once, his posture straightening as if a weight had been lifted. Marcus didn't linger on the small details of their departure. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered, and the culture of this place would either change or be swept away with the next wave of leadership he was prepared to unleash. He turned and walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click that felt like the final note of a symphony. As he stepped back into the lobby, Janelle looked up from her tablet, her eyes meeting his with a quiet respect that needed no words. Marcus gave her a single nod, a silent promise that her decency had not gone unnoticed, and walked past her toward the door. Outside, the air was different somehow, the clouds rolling low across the sky, like a reminder that even the most ordinary mornings can hold the seeds of transformation. And Marcus Turner knew that he hadn't just walked into a bank this morning. He had walked into a moment that would change everything. Stepping back out into the soft daylight, Marcus Turner paused just outside the glass doors of the bank branch. He allowed himself a moment in the cool morning air, the weight of what had just occurred settling in around him like a cloak. Inside, chaos and quiet fear had already begun to replace the casual disdain of earlier. Shelby, Derek, Patricia gone, chairs left empty, systems paused mid-task. But outside, everything seemed strangely normal. Passing cars, distant lawn mowers, a crisp breeze stirring the leaves overhead as if the world had barely noticed the shift. His phone buzzed again. A message from Ellis. "Need me to call the press team?" Marcus glanced at the text, fingers hovering over the keypad. For a moment he considered it. This morning's events had resonance beyond just the walls of this branch. But he didn't want headlines. He wanted change. He typed back with calm assurance. "Not yet. Let's see if this resonates from the ground up." Then he turned his attention back to the empty lot, his gaze drifting to the line of cars parked under a sky that was unusually still. Each vehicle held an ordinary story: commuters, business meetings, errands, normalcy unfolding beside an extraordinary moment of reckoning. He tucked the phone away and opened the car door, pausing for just a second at the threshold. In that stillness, he considered the delicate balance of this moment, the moment between what had been and what could be. Then he closed the door quietly and stepped away. Inside, Thomas Beck reopened the conference room to address the remaining staff. There was a palpable hush as he led them in, guiding them to sit in what remained of the circle. Marcus was gone, but his presence still hovered, their actions, their silence, the broken thread of what they hadn't done, all woven into the fabric of the moment. Thomas walked to the front, his hands deep in his pockets, and exhaled slowly before speaking. "Good morning," he began, voice steady but not harsh. "You can go ahead and sit." He paused as they obeyed, each individual folding into a seat with a weight of shame or resignation coloring their movements. "I know this has been intense." His gaze flicked among the faces, Janelle's firm attention, Devin's flushed relief, the gray pallor settling on the others. "But it wasn't about one customer," he continued, voice growing more measured. "It's about our culture. It's about respect. And, whether we like it or not, Trilonix is watching." His words hung in the air with gravity. No longer did the staff feel the sharp edge of power tied to Marcus. They felt the soft but unyielding weight of accountability. Janelle straightened, as if pulled by an invisible thread of resolve. Devin released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, his eyes flicking around as if searching for forgiveness. The rest sat still longer, processing what they'd been part of and what they'd allowed. Meanwhile, in his car a few blocks away, Marcus pressed play on a recording Ellis had sent. The voicemail left by Devin when he had said he'd arrive earlier. An unspoken apology caught in static, the tone humble. Marcus listened all the way through, his expression unreadable, before stopping the playback. Then, he dialed Eden, a trusted board member, and left another message conveying his intent: to rebuild, to hold people accountable, and to cast a new standard across their entire network. By midday, the neighborhood began to notice. Neighbors saw the locked doors and informational sign posted hastily on the glass. Some raised questions, some speculated. Rumors began to form like clouds gathering before a storm. But what they didn't see was the flurry of transformation taking place inside those walls. HR teams scrubbed internal profiles, strength training manuals were reordered, online training modules were updated with new language. The word respect was hammered into every checkbox and bullet point, every expectation sheet, every performance review. Janelle found herself in compliance training, about 20 feet away from where Shelby had once sat. Her pen was poised, her mind racing, not with anxiety, but with something new. Hope. She listened as an instructor detailed the new guidelines, each bullet point a brick in the building of a different future. When asked for an example, she spoke up, her voice quieter than a whisper, but clear. Extend the same attention to everyone, no exceptions, no categories. It was exactly what Marcus had seen that morning, that simple gesture of acknowledgement that spoke volumes. And now she was becoming an embodiment of that change. Later, Thomas summoned Marcus to the branch to walk through the changes in person. The branch had been tidied, new signage added, training reminders posted in bright blue ink. Staff were repositioned, schedules shifted to give everyone clarity and structure. Marcus moved through the spaces with a quiet calm, inspecting, asking questions. When he paused in front of Janelle, who was now functioning as a de facto interim lead, he nodded once, approval in his eyes. "She's who I want," he said to Thomas softly, though loud enough for Janelle to hear. "Right place, right time, right person." Meanwhile, Devin submitted his written apology and reflections, acknowledging the gap between intent and impact. Expressing gratitude that Marcus had challenged them to be better, he requested mentorship, a plan laid out in 3 phases. Listening, learning, leading. He felt exposed, uneasy, but alive with the possibility of growth. By day's end, the branch pings a note, a calendar invite for a follow-up meeting Friday afternoon, and a reflection survey that seeded new questions in their minds. How did they feel the day Marcus walked in? How had they been involved in systemic bias before it? What did respect for all look like when the cameras were off? Back at Trilonics headquarters in Cincinnati, Marcus returned to a waiting group of interns and junior associates. They circled him in the sleek, echoing hallways, eager for takeaway. He recounted the morning's events not with pride, but as a case study. Complex, nuanced, instructive. This wasn't about wielding power, he said. It was about recognizing that in every interaction, no matter how small, you either uphold humanity or diminish it. He paused at the threshold of his office, light falling across his face like a spotlight. "I want Trilonics to be more than a fintech engine. I want it to be a statement. That respect isn't conditional. That leadership isn't just title. That listening is where influence begins." One intern, a young man with quiet eyes, raised his hand. "Was it hard to sit in silence while they ignored you?" Marcus acknowledged him without turning around. "Of course," he said. "Every part of me wanted to speak louder. But it's easier to be heard if you speak truthfully and wait until even your silence speaks." He closed the door, leaving the interns murmuring among themselves. In that moment, every notebook scribbled with new epiphanies, every resolve hardening into something concrete. Because in that room with that CEO, they understood. Power doesn't demand respect, it gives it. And those lessons would echo far beyond the banks. As dusk settled on Columbus, the branch lights dimmed to a soft glow. Janelle left last, locking the front door thoughtfully, carrying a notebook thick with notes. Devin lingered to ensure closing processes were complete, sleeves rolled, determination in his tension. Thomas stood by the window, hands behind his back, reviewing the day's work with a measured smile. They were all changed, whether subtly or deeply didn't matter. What mattered was that change had begun. And somewhere in the skyline, high above, a silver Tesla made its way back through the city, carrying a man who'd done more than issue directives. He'd catalyzed a transformation. And as he returned to his office, the front of his mind wasn't filled with headlines or accolades. It was filled with one question. Would they keep listening? Because the next chapters depended not on one person, but on whether those in the lobby and beyond would commit to the quiet work of change. The sun had begun its slow climb across the sky by the time Marcus Turner left the branch, but the clouds rolling in from the west cast a deeper shadow over the neighborhood, the thick slate-gray masses moving like a promise of rain. He didn't mind the darkening sky. It matched the quiet intensity of what had just unfolded within those walls. As he reached his car, he didn't get in immediately. Instead, he leaned against the door, arms crossed over his chest, his mind turning over the morning's events with the precision of a man used to weighing every angle. His presence was a silhouette against the bright glint of the Tesla, a man calm and composed, but very much alive with purpose. Behind him, the bank branch hummed with a nervous energy that belied the calm exterior. Janelle's figure moved through the lobby, headset still in place, her expression focused and composed as she reorganized tasks that had once seemed routine but were now charged with a new weight. Thomas Beck stood at the center of the floor, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low tone that carried none of the confidence he had projected earlier. "Yes, Ellis," he said. No, he didn't raise his voice once. "Yeah, it's handled, fully." He ended the call and turned to Devon, who hovered by the conference room door, his posture stiff with unease. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with a quiet assessment that carried more weight than any shouted reprimand. "You dodged a bullet today," Thomas said simply, his voice even. "If you had said even one thing sideways this morning—" Devon swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he raised both hands in a gesture of defense. I didn't even know he was here until I heard his name." Thomas's lips pressed into a line, the corners of his mouth twitching as if he wanted to sigh but held it in. "And that's part of the problem," he said quietly. "He was in that lobby for almost 40 minutes, Devon, and no one thought to ask why." Devon nodded, his face pale as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the unspoken acknowledgement of what had almost been lost that morning. Outside, Marcus still leaned against the Tesla, watching the shifting sky as if it held some kind of answer. He didn't fidget or pace. He simply waited, as he had always done, with the kind of patient certainty that didn't require motion to be felt. Moments later, a blue Toyota pulled into the lot, the engine humming softly as it glided to a stop in the space next to Marcus's car. Out stepped Ellis Ducci, the COO of Trilonics Financial, a man who walked with the easy confidence of someone who had fired 3 people before lunch and closed a $10 million deal before dinner. He was dressed in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, his salt and pepper goatee meticulously trimmed, his eyes scanning the bank's facade as he approached Marcus. "You good?" Ellis asked, his voice low and familiar. Marcus nodded once, his posture unchanging. "Want me to go in?" Ellis offered, a flicker of humor in his tone that didn't quite reach his eyes. Marcus's lips curved just slightly. "Already handled," he said quietly, his voice a soft thunder. "But we'll need HR to draft a proper retraining module." Ellis exhaled, pulling out his phone and tapping in a quick note. "I'll write it up tonight. Want me to talk to the press team? This might leak." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I hope it does," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. Ellis paused, his eyes flicking to Marcus's profile, reading the resolve in the tight line of his jaw. "What about the young woman at the front, the one with the headset?" he asked. Marcus's expression softened, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly as he thought of Janelle. "She's a keeper," he said, his voice warm for the first time that day. "Professional. Didn't try to block me. She listened." Ellis nodded, making a note on his phone. "Got it. Promote eventually, but first I want to meet her." Marcus didn't reply, but the small nod he gave was all the confirmation Ellis needed. Inside the branch, the atmosphere had shifted from nervous energy to a kind of fragile stillness. The same room that had held gossip and eye rolls hours earlier now felt like a courtroom. Every breath measured, every movement deliberate. Thomas stood in the center of the floor, the authority in his posture clear as he spoke to the remaining staff. "She's gone," he said quietly, referring to Marcus, though the weight of those 2 words carried more than just his absence. "But don't mistake that for being forgotten." The staff looked up, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Thomas let the silence stretch for a beat, then continued, his voice calm but firm. "I've been with this bank chain for 20 years. I've seen 4 different acquisitions. I've seen executives come in, cut people, smile for the cameras, and disappear. Marcus Turner isn't that kind of executive." He paused again, letting that truth settle into the bones of the room. "He remembers names," Thomas said softly. "He watches behaviors. He makes decisions based on how you treat the ones who don't look like money." Devon swallowed, his mouth dry as he shifted in his seat. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice low but insistent. Thomas looked around the room, his eyes meeting each person's gaze in turn. "Now," he said, his voice a quiet drumbeat. "Now you get a second chance. but I swear to you, if any of you act like today didn't mean anything, it'll be your last." He turned to Janelle, who sat at the edge of her seat, pen poised, eyes sharp. "What's your name again?" he asked, though he already knew. "Janelle," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the nerves buzzing in her chest. Thomas smiled faintly. "Miss Turner asked to speak with you before she leaves." Janelle blinked, her breath catching in her throat. "Me?" she whispered, unsure if she had heard correctly. Thomas nodded once. "Yes. Now." Outside, Marcus still stood with Ellis, his eyes calm but alert as Janelle stepped out of the glass doors, her small notepad clutched in her hand like a shield. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, the weight of what she was about to do, pressing down on her shoulders but not bending her spine. Marcus watched her approach, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable but not unkind. When she stopped in front of him, she took a breath, her fingers tightening around the notepad. "You called for me, sir?" she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. Marcus smiled then, a small, quiet smile that said more than any words could have. "You can call me Marcus," he said gently. "Yes, sir, Marcus," she said, correcting herself quickly. Marcus's eyes softened as he studied her, seeing not just the nervousness but the courage beneath it. "Tell me something," he said, his tone as smooth as the air before a summer storm. "Why didn't you brush me off when I said I was here for Devon?" Janelle shifted her weight, her eyes flicking up to meet his before dropping again. "Because, well, I recognized your name," she said quietly. "I read all the internal memos, but also, even if I hadn't," she hesitated, gathering her thoughts, "even if I hadn't known who you were, you didn't seem like someone who came in without a reason." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Meaning?" he prompted. Janelle's cheeks flushed faintly, but she didn't look away. "I just mean, you walked in like you were here for a purpose. And people like that, people with purpose, they deserve to be heard no matter who they are." Marcus's smile widened, not because the words flattered him, but because they spoke to something deeper, a truth he'd always believed in but rarely heard said aloud. "Good," he said softly, his voice a quiet affirmation. "You ever thought about project management?" Janelle's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "I mean, eventually, yes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus nodded once, his gaze warm but steady. "Good," he said again, the single word carrying the weight of a promise. "You'll be hearing from Ellis. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't let anyone train you out of it." Janelle's eyes shone with something bright and fierce, her heart thudding in her chest. "Thank you," she said simply, the two words carrying every ounce of gratitude she felt. Marcus didn't say anything else. He just gave her a small nod, a quiet benediction, before turning back to his car. As he opened the door and slid behind the wheel, he didn't look back at the bank. He didn't need to. The real work had already begun, inside those walls and inside the people who had been forced to see themselves clearly for the first time. And as he drove away, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and insistent, washing the dust from the air and leaving behind a world that felt just a little bit cleaner. Marcus Turner returned to Cincinnati headquarters later that day, the weight of the morning still lingering in the quiet hum of the Tesla's cabin as he navigated the city streets. Inside the building, he found Ellis Duce waiting near the elevator, the air around him charged with purpose. They exchanged a brief nod before walking together toward the regional HR hub, where a gathering of senior managers had assembled in anticipation. The room was sleek and modern, walls adorned with soft acoustic panels, a round table at its center reflecting subdued lighting. On the table lay thick binders labeled Respect and Equity, each one containing new protocols, case studies, and revised training modules, an intentional blueprint for cultural transformation across every branch. Marcus took a seat at the table's head, his posture composed, radiating a calm authority that commanded attention without dominance. The group of executives, head of compliance, regional managers, talent development leads, watched him expectantly. He opened one binder and gently tapped his fingers on it. "Today," he began, "we take a step beyond transactions, beyond numbers and quarterly targets. We're building a culture that sees the person behind every transaction." He paused, letting those words settle over the room before continuing. The incident at the East Livingston branch was not just an isolated lapse. It was a symptom of complacency, of a culture that allowed invisible barriers to exist. We're not here to punish regret. We're here to prevent it. He looked around and locked eyes with each person in turn. His gaze landed last on Janelle's folder, already marked for development and coaching. The compliance head, Sarah, interjected, "We've adjusted the branch reevaluation process. Every branch will now undergo quarterly cultural audits, anonymized surveys, mystery shoppers, live leadership reviews." Marcus nodded. "Good. Metrics matter, but so do stories." He tapped the page displaying Janelle's first quarter HR report as a model for emerging leadership. Janelle showed empathy, awareness, presence. Those are the qualities we encourage. We need training not to teach those. They're innate, but to make space for them. He leaned forward, voice steady and heartfelt. In leadership development, I don't want people learning how to be heard. I want them learning how to listen and truly care about what they hear. As the discussion evolved, Ellis highlighted the implementation timeline: mandatory retraining by end of month, rollouts in every region, follow-up coaching sessions, leadership workshops. Marcus listened, occasionally nudging strategy toward practical impact, never letting rhetoric overshadow accountability. After nearly 2 hours, the meeting ended with crisp clarity and actionable outcomes. Each regional manager would host 3 transparent team conversations. Each frontline lead would mentor at least one employee from a different background, and HR would pilot a diversity-run leadership lab modeled after Janelle's experience. When the group dispersed, Marcus lingered, flipping through the binder until his finger fell on a page bearing the title, "Client Respect, No Labels Attached." He closed the binder gently, placing it on the table with purpose. Turning, he said quietly to Ellis, "We start here." And outside, the day shifted to dusk, the corridors emptying as employees left for the evening. Janelle lingered by her desk, riding a wave of resolve so deep it hummed beneath her shirt. She reviewed her notes from the day, every bullet point a seed for becoming the leader Marcus believed she could be. She noticed Devin leaving late, his face shadowed by fatigue and reflection, and rose to offer him a ride home. He accepted gratefully, and as they walked side by side toward the parking garage, they traded quiet words about accountability, genuine respect, and the cost of true leadership. He thanked her again for standing up, and Janelle reminded him, quietly, "We all get to stand when someone gives us the space." Downstairs, lights outside blinked as cars streamed by. The rain had stopped, but puddles still shimmered under the lamps, reflecting neon and hope in equal measure. Marcus returned to his office, settled behind the executive desk, and made his first public entry in the company intranet blog, "Toward a Culture of Listening." His words were direct. "The foundation of trust is not built on statements, but on recognition, and we recognized our failure. Now we build, and it begins with each choice to truly see the person across from us." Replies began to flow, some tentative, some impassioned, as employees across departments shared small moments of connection, of voices heard, of times they had paused and listened anew. That night, Marcus walked home under streetlights, his reflection cast in silent windows. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt accountable, because new culture is not made with a decree. It's woven through countless small interactions over countless days. And tomorrow, he would return to one of the branches, not as a CEO, but as a listener, because he knew that real leadership lives in the echoes of how we treat the simplest moments. And in those echoes, he believed, lay the future. As the early morning light filtered through the vertical blinds in the East Livingston branch, a notable stillness pervaded the air, different from the tense hush of prior days, now infused with cautious purpose. 13 employees stood in a semicircle around a whiteboard marked "Values in Action," their posture upright, their eyes reflecting curiosity and a touch of anticipation. Among them, Janelle sat at the front, pen in hand, poised to lead today's session. Beside her, Devin appeared restless yet determined, paper folder pressed to his chest, a physical reminder of his journey through the storm of accountability. That morning, Thomas Beck stepped forward, his measured voice welcoming everyone. "Today we continue the conversation Marcus began. This isn't training, it's a transformation of how we function as human beings in this space." He nodded to Janelle. "You've earned the floor." Janelle inhaled slowly, her heart pounding as she rose. She cleared her throat with composure. "Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all for being here. I want to share a simple insight I realized in the past few days, that sometimes recognizing someone's humanity is the single most powerful act we can choose." The room softened, employees' cultures leaning in. 2 mornings ago, she said, a man walked in who owned this place. He wore no fanfare. He stood in our lobby, and rather than engaging him, performing our job, we dismissed him. A hush filled the space. No denial, just acknowledgement. She continued, I saw it because I looked. In that moment, I had to choose. Treat him as if he mattered, or let him disappear into the background. I chose to treat him as if he mattered, because I believe everyone matters. She paused, voice steady. But choose for yourself, because this is no longer about him or me. It's about each of us deciding what we stand for. She invited the group to break into pairs and share a moment when someone recognized them and how it shifted everything. Quiet confessions followed, an older teller whose manager had praised her small acts of kindness, a security guard whose smile had relieved a frightened customer, a janitor whose name was greeted with respect in the morning. Devin listened from his seat, his pen scribbling notes, not to justify, but to engage. When it was his turn, he stood and cleared his throat. I acted poorly. I didn't notice that this morning mattered as much as others. I want to do more than apologize. I want to rebuild. His honesty elicited nods, soft murmurs of acceptance. Janelle offered a gentle smile. That's how it begins, Devin. For nearly 2 hours, they shared stories, reflected on accountability, and sketched new guiding principles. See the person, not the transaction. Silence can speak louder than words. Everyone has a right to be heard. Between each session, Janelle and Devin circulated to support colleagues, sometimes pausing to offer encouragement, other times to listen quietly as someone confessed fear or remorse. Outside, the rain had returned, light, steady, tapping on windows as if giving its own applause to the new culture unfolding inside. By midday, the session concluded with a collective affirmation. Each would commit to 3 intentional acts of recognition every day and report back by Friday. As the group disbanded, lingering energy hovered. Janelle gathered pens and notes from the table, feeling a warmth she'd never known at work, like purpose given and challenge accepted. Devin approached, offering a soft nod of gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly. For being brave enough, she returned the nod. We're doing it. For everyone. As they stepped out into the lobby, Thomas joined them. He looked at the pair and said, I've seen many stand-up talks, but this is different. You two are leading by living it. That's the change Marcus believed in. He paused, then added with a hint of pride, he wants you both to train with him in Cincinnati. The announcement hit them gently, as if they were budding leaders finally recognized. Janelle blinked. Devin grinned despite the gravity of the moment. Thomas's voice stayed low, but the promise in it resonated deep. The ripple begins here. Later that evening, Marcus returned to his hotel room in Columbus, the day's events echoing in his mind. He opened his laptop, pulled up a shared platform, and posted a new message. Leadership isn't a title, it's a choice to see and be seen. Today we witnessed that in Columbus. Congratulations to Janelle and Devin for starting that ripple. A flood of responses followed. Regional managers, interns, corporate staff, all writing of small wins and renewed hope. Marcus read each one, pausing on a line from an operations clerk in Michigan. Because someone finally saw me, I feel like I belong. He closed the laptop slowly, his chest tight with resolve. Change, he knew, would come not by grand gestures, but by quiet rituals of recognition repeated millions of times across every lobby, every interaction. And as the rain continued its gentle percussion on the window pane, Marcus smiled. Because today the foundation of a new culture had been set, and the strongest structures start not with steel beams, but with the belief that everyone deserves to be seen. Marcus Turner's flight back to Cincinnati, it was quiet. The hum of the jet engines echoed the ongoing transformation he'd catalyzed. He replayed in his mind the conversations, the voices that had shifted from hesitation to purpose. In the cabin's dim lighting, he typed a short message to Ellis. Schedule inaugural leadership lab next week. Columbus alumni first. He hit send and closed his eyes for a moment, envisioning the waves of change ready to cascade outward from that one branch. Back at Troy Elonic's headquarters, early Monday morning, the lobby's energy felt different. Staff in khakis and blazers, coffee cups in hand, greeted one another by name. The intern who once shuffled past without eye contact now paused to ask Marcus how his weekend went. He smiled, gratitude flickering beneath his calm exterior. No announcement was needed. The shift was already in motion. In a glass-walled conference room, Ellis reviewed the agenda for the first leadership lab, featuring developmental toolkits, reflective exercises, and breakout sessions. He glanced up at Marcus. "This is new territory," he said. Marcus nodded. "So is real leadership." Across Columbus that day, Janelle returned to East Livingston, not as a timid employee, but as a recognized young leader. She carried the binder from her workshop, flipping through pages filled with feedback and action plans. She greeted each teammate, Devin from Teller Services, Malik from Security, listening to their weekend commitments to respectful customer service. They smiled back, conviction in their eyes. 2 floors above, Devin opened his email to find a request: lead a compliance review at a sister branch. His fingers hovered before he typed, "Consider it accepted." Then sent. He exhaled, anticipation fading into responsibility. In Cincinnati's 7th floor strategy hub, board members assembled as Marcus stood before them, the image of Janelle and Devin's breakthroughs projected on the screen. He spoke plainly. Culture isn't aspirational values on a wall. It's how you lead when nobody's watching. These two reminded us of that. Applause followed, genuine and sustained. That evening, Marcus and Ellis walked from the office toward the public plaza, soft lights beneath their steps. "You think we can sustain it?" Ellis asked. Marcus studied the crowd, young couples enjoying dinner, employees already away from the office, and replied, "If we keep doing this, it becomes who we are, not just what we say." Back at home, Marcus received an unexpected call from a branch manager in Michigan who'd heard about the Columbus changes. "I want to do the same here." Marcus's advice was simple: start by seeing people. In the following days, the Columbus branch introduced monthly listening moments, where employees shared candid feedback without fear of hierarchy. Questions like, "Who did you appreciate today?" replaced typical fund transfer training. Small gestures, a tea for a teller, a sincere "thank you for being here," started to absorb into daily routines. Meanwhile, Marcus compiled anonymized testimonials from staff across regions. One story, about a shy courier who felt seen when offered a name tag, became the centerpiece of the next global all-hands. He paused mid-speech, letting his colleagues absorb the quiet power of dignity. By Friday, the East Livingston team convened again, this time to assess progress. They shared informal metrics. Janelle reported fewer customer complaints, more smiles. Malik noted more greetings from peers. Devin described comfort in holding others accountable. There were no slides. Just authentic updates circling around Janelle's binder marked cultural growth. In Cincinnati, Marcus walked the halls late at night. A security guard recognized him and offered a wave and a thankful grin, small, spontaneous evidence of change. He paused, closing his eyes. The ripples were real beyond what one man could alone. Back at home desk, he journaled. Leaders aren't born. They're heard, acknowledged, invited. Where recognition and respect meet, potential awakens. He prepared the final slide for the next week's regional summit, a simple, powerful line: "See me and I will stand." And in that moment, he understood. The journey, far from over, had reached its first milestone, a shift from authority to accountability, from indifference to empathy. The foundations laid in silence, when he stood and was ignored, had become stepping stones for countless others. In each quiet affirmation, a new leader emerged, and Marcus Turner, CEO turned advocate, smiled, ready for the next wave dot. As dawn painted the Cincinnati skyline with pale strokes of light, Marcus Turner sat in his home office, fingerprints on a coffee mug and the soft hum of his laptop filling the silence. This was the moment he'd built toward, not a boardroom, not a press release, but this quiet hour before the world woke. His inbox glowed with messages from around the organization. Branch managers asking for guidance, interns sharing reflections, even distant regional teams proposing initiatives inspired by Columbus. The ripple he'd set in motion was swelling into a current. Yet he remained seated, contemplative, because he knew that real culture, like any living thing, grows not in the heat of one moment, but in the persistent care of many. That morning his calendar noted a meeting with Janelle and Devin, now part of an official leadership council tasked with spreading the see and be seen ethos. As he logged into the video call, he greeted them with warm calm. Their faces, hers bright with anticipation, his reflective but resolute, felt like evidence of a shift far deeper than policy or procedure. "Thank you for joining," he began, voice steady. "This isn't a reward, but a responsibility. You're both here because you lived the principles we're now embedding into Trilonic's DNA. He paused, letting the weight of those words anchor in their hearts. Over the next 90 minutes, they brainstormed next steps. Shadow visits to other branches, peer-led training modules, even reverse mentorship days, where newer employees would coach executives on human-centered service. Everything they designed began with questions. How do we consistently see people? How do we hear them? How do those moments translate into habits? Meanwhile, across the Midwest, East Livingston's branch met again. At 7 a.m., under the soft hum of overhead lights, the team gathered in a circle that now felt normal and necessary, not forced. Janelle stood poised at the whiteboard, no longer trembling, but calm in her command. Today, we focus on language, she said. Every phrase we use either invites connection or closes it off. Devin, seated beside her, nodded. We start with "thank you for waiting," not because it's polite, but because it acknowledges presence. Together, they practiced, role-played, debriefed. A teller admitted she'd once referred to customers as accounts in her head. She promised to rewire that language. A manager confessed they'd forgotten how impactful a small smile could be. They all left the session with a homework assignment. Each pick a phrase that changed a conversation that day and share it at tomorrow's check-in. Later that afternoon, Marcus stepped into a branch on the north side of Cincinnati, a modest facility with a single entryway and 3 desks. But in the lobby's warm glow, he spotted something profound. Employees greeting each other by name, eyes meeting with real openness. As Marcus quietly observed, a middle-aged man walked in. The teller, a woman named Maria, greeted him by name and asked how his morning had been, just like Janelle trained them to do. That man was Marcus, but here he was treated like himself. Not a test, not an outsider, just a person walking into a branch where he belonged. Marcus offered his card discreetly, saying, "I'm here to say thank you." She glanced at it, recognized the name, but didn't pause. Instead, she smiled. He walked out, his posture softening, for what he saw reflected the quiet triumph of hundreds of small acts that changed everything. Back in his office, Marcus drafted his keynote for the upcoming Regional Leadership Summit. He wrote of respect, not as concept, but as currency, exchanged in moments of recognition. He wrote of power as stewardship, not dominance. He wrote of leadership not as command, but as invitation. And then, he typed a final sentence. Organizational transformation doesn't begin with a CEO's decree. It begins with a teller's greeting. And with that, he stepped away, knowing that he couldn't personally say thank you to every person who'd begun this journey, but he believed they'd feel his gratitude in every email open, every check-in message, every "how are you?" in the hallways. On the eve of the summit, at his home again, Marcus scanned his reflection in the window. Behind him lay the city lights of Cincinnati, some bright, some dim, each a story waiting to unfold, each a person deserving to be seen. He closed his laptop, exhaled slowly, and whispered to himself, "We changed nothing, and everything." Because he knew true change is invisible at first, unfolding not in grand spectacles, but in the quiet, consistent acts of compassion, repeated over time. Then he reached for his coat and stepped out, ready to do it again tomorrow. So in the end, it was never about the bank, the suits, or the titles. It was about a quiet truth that echoed louder than any applause, that real power isn't in being recognized, but in recognizing others. Marcus Turner didn't raise his voice that day, but he raised a standard that no one in that room would ever forget. And as he walked away, he left behind more than a restructured branch. He left behind a promise that every person, no matter their role or story, deserved to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with the dignity that is their birthright. It's a lesson for every workplace and every hallway where someone might one day feel invisible. Let it be our reminder, too, that the world doesn't change in boardrooms. It changes in the quiet moments when someone chooses to see what others overlook. And maybe, just maybe, that choice is where our true legacy begins.